Good afternoon. This is Jeff Dawson from a freezing cold Dallas, Texas. I already did a Facebook Live on this, so I thought I'd do a YouTube for the power go. If you saw, if you saw the title, ERCOT did what COVID couldn't, and it shut down the state of Texas. We've got millions of people without power because of government incompetence. And ERCOT is incompetent. I had never heard of this company here since 1983. I knew of Encore, I knew of TXU, I knew of Lone Star Gas. Those were common names, no big deal. But I'd never heard of ERCOT. They formed in 1970. This is a bureaucratic organization that's in charge of the power grid, the state of Texas. Yeah, just what we need is another government agency to oversee our power grid. We've already got in the Texas legislature to regulate the power companies. No, we had to come up with something new, something that would unify everyone. Yeah, unification my ass. I'll tell you that right now. ERCOT is a 501c. By heavens, from the get-go. Now, it just gets worse. Let's look at the top three people who are in charge of this abomination. The CEO is Bill Mangus. And what's his expertise? Oh, he's a lawyer. Oh, she's a regulator and one of the founding members of the Green Bank. And the third in control, the vice chair, is Peter Calton. He's a professor of economics. Boy, doesn't that sound like the three people you want running your power grid? Not a working stiff in the bunch, a bunch of bureaucrats. And the pay for this fine establishment is top pay is $186,000 a year, low pay is $63,000, and the average is $86,000. Yeah, they're all hurting, aren't they? God knows how many other commissions they're on, but when you look at your bios, you'll find them. This isn't any better than an organization I'm very familiar with, the North Texas Council of Governments, which is where Dallas and Tarrant County got together to unify construction methods across this area. And all the surrounding cities could join: North Richland Hills, Capel, Colleyville, Louisville, Carrollton, Garland, Mesquite, Wilmer Hutchinson, anybody. They could join in. And they did. And the only problem in Plano. And the only problem with that is, even though they had these unified guidelines, they didn't have to stick by them, because if a city didn't like what they read, then come up with their own. And the city of Plano was probably the best at it, in that they've got more addendas than the book is long or thick, because they don't have to abide by them. This ERCOT is a disaster. And we were discussing this topic last night with a bunch of friends, because they were in my room so we could stay warm. We live in a hotel that was built in the 70s. It's a concrete block and steel. It's not built as an insulator. And yeah, it gets cold, just like a lot of these homes and these friends and neighbors that you hear from. Temperatures in the 50s, 40s, and 30s in their homes. Well, compound that in a hotel, that the generator doesn't work, so guess what? The elevators don't work either. Granted, some people are getting their exercise that is much needed, and some just aren't physically able to do it, so they're kind of stuck in their rooms. Yeah, those three brain surgeons didn't think about that when they decided, oh, I guess the grid can't handle this. One day of cold weather, day. And then if you listen to the news, it's unprecedented. We've never seen this before. I've been here since 83, 84. I know it has happened before because it happened that winter. It was horrible. We had 13 days of this brutal weather. We had lower lows than what we experienced one night. 13 days, but we didn't rely on solar and wind power in 83, 84. We relied on hydroelectric, coal-fired, and nuclear. But we didn't have rolling blackouts in the winter. I mean, that storm 83, 84 did the same thing this one. It went all the way to Houston. Houston froze. Solid. I was down there for the Bluebonnet Bowl, Oklahoma State and Baylor. It was cold down there. And it stayed that way for, as I said, 13 to 15 days. We have one day of this. And what the hell is it with Abbott declaring a state of emergency and Biden supporting it a day before the storm hits? That tells me he had a real good idea that something bad was about to happen in our power grid. And they say that they are wanting to save energy. Well, most people can't go to work right now, whether it was COVID restrictions or the bad streets and roads. All the businesses that are surrounding us, they're all shut down. So who's using all this power? If the businesses are shut down, if the buildings in downtown, this is a scam. This is the biggest scam I've ever seen in the state. And I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent. This is bullshit. Period. Reminds me of the book and the movie Atlas Shrugs, where the government gets more and more and more power, and the people that actually do the work don't agree with the parity of pay. The plants start shutting down, the infrastructure starts collapsing, and the only people in charge are the politicians who couldn't tie their own shoe with written directions. And this is exactly where we're at. Yes, I'm a Republican, but Greg Abbott, this is the biggest fuck up I've ever seen in my life. You and the assistant governor, vice governor, hell, I forgot what the exact, all of you, heads need to roll. And we don't need to have this, oh, we're going to have an investigation. I want an inquisition is what I want. I want them lined up. You're not going to push the blame off on anybody else. I also would like to see, as evidence presented by the guys who run these substations, see what their maintenance requests have been for the last 5 to 10 years. See what requests they've made for equipment upgrades and see how many of those have been denied, or we don't worry about it, or we'll get around to it. I'd like to see the memos on, hey guys, with the temperature, you better figure out how to put de-icing units in them instead of having to hire helicopters at $500 to $750 an hour to come out and de-ice the blades and the rotors. You better figure out how to put a heating element in there so this doesn't happen. I'm in construction, and some states up north have actually put wires like they did with the old heat pumps, freeze up. Imagine what that would cost to refit every one of these turbines. I don't have a problem with green energy, but you just don't start phasing out stuff because you don't like it when you don't have something reliable to back it up. And as we are finding out in Texas, it ain't reliable, and it's 23% of our power grid, and millions are suffering over this poor experiment. You think about the people that bought groceries that have gone bad because they lost their power. The freezer stuff would be okay, but the perishables and the refrigerator part, she got her family together. They stayed in one bedroom to stay warm. And I said, if it doesn't get better, go to your mom's, because apparently they still have power in Quinlan. She woke up this morning, the water's frozen. Not because she didn't leave the drip on, it just froze. The Princeton water, that when the thaw does hit, the pipes explode and floors are ruined and walls are ruined and the plumbers have to come out. This time it shouldn't be the insurance companies. It should be those who are the politicians that are responsible for this. They should have to pay for this, not the state, not the insurance companies. These people that allowed this abomination to happen. They have the power off for 4 hours and see what happens. You know, back in, I think it was the 90s when Oklahoma had a horrible ice storm. It was 4 to 6 inches of ice. The town of McAllister's water plant and sewage treatment plant, they froze solid. Well, that wasn't anybody's fault. That was an act of God. In fact, where Reuben McIntyre is in Kiowa, it was weeks before anybody could get to those people off the beaten path because of the downed trees and felled limbs. That was an act of God. This is not an act of God. This is an act of absolute bureaucratic stupidity. And they need to be held accountable for this. What about the people on insulin? They're somewhere I live. They have to have their insulin. It has to be at a constant temperature. They can't afford to lose that because they're on a fixed income. They sure the hell can't afford to go to the pharmacy and pick up another batch just because they're on a fixed income. Who pays for that? Who pays for these medications that are going to go bad? Just like, what was it, the 7,000 batches they lost in Houston because they lost power to the freezer? Who's going to pay for that? The bureaucrats need to pay this time. They all need to be held accountable. No one's going to duck and run. No one's going to start pushing the blame off on somebody else. Every one of these sons of bitches is responsible for this fiasco, and it's not over. We've got at least 2 more days. It's the bureaucrats. And like I said, this little Sally Talberg, she was one of the founders of the Green Bank. Well, take your Green Bank and stick it up your goat-smelling ass. Because we're paying for your all's stupidity. And don't write this off and say, it's just an anomaly. It only happens once. You're also going to be held responsible for the increase in house fires, because people will start burning anything they can to stay warm. And if they haven't cleaned out their chimneys properly, the chimney will catch fire. And when the chimney catches fire, then the house is going to catch fire, and they're going to be homeless. And it's your fault. And what about these people? And I was talking to my friends last night. I said, you just wait and see. There is going to be a dramatic increase in carbon monoxide poisoning cases. And what did I hear this morning, first thing off of the bat, when I did have power and was watching the news? 4 dead in Houston, carbon monoxide poisoning. People will be desperate to stay warm. And if they don't know any better, they're going to get in their cars. They're going to be in the garage. They're going to turn it on. They're going to have their family in there. They're not going to know what carbon monoxide poisoning is. They're caught in Austin. That's who's to blame, and they need to be held accountable for this. No one's dodging a bullet this time. No one's going to get. Not this time. And it doesn't matter what party affiliation you're at, because this blackout is affecting Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green Party, any party you want to come up with. It's affecting everyone. Well, I don't know what is. We've had winners like this. 2011, when Jerry had the Super Bowl, opened up his stadium, the Packers and the Steelers. We got a foot of snow. Everything was shut down in Dallas and Fort Worth. Everything. Only thing that went on was the game. Of course, I kind of laughed because Jerry oversold the game by 5,000 tickets, and he got sued, and he had to pay every one of those people back for their travel expenses, their lodging, their food, and the tickets. I thought that was great. Yeah, I'm not a Jerry Jones fan, but that's another story. But this is just ridiculous, and this time someone needs to be held accountable. That's all there is to it. I mean, one person on Facebook asked me, well, what happened if we got a real bad storm? I mean, because, yeah, in the broad scheme of things, this really isn't. Temperature-wise, yeah, it's going to be cold, but it's not this extended cold like the summers that we've had of 1980 and 2006, where we just baked to death, and they talked about brownouts and rolling shut system is that fragile. Yes, I'll be right back. What you got? No, that's you guys are horrible. Okay. All right. All righty. All right. I apologize for that. My neighbor got a new heating unit. Wanted me to check it out to see if I saw the same thing. And yeah, they just installed it, and the damn thing's not working. Okay. Excuse me. But this got to stop. But oh yeah, a bad storm. So what if we get a bad storm? Well, if you know much about World War II history and you've read much, think about 1942, 1943, and 44 and 45. In the first one, think about Stalingrad. And the second one, think about Bastogne in the Battle of the Bulge. That's how bad it can get if they can't get this grid shit together. And you read anything about those battles, we had like 30,000 casualties in the Bulge from frostbite. 30 on the American side for the Battle of the Bulge. And then you think about Stalingrad, the same thing. Bitterly cold. Both sides suffered. Yeah, the Germans suffered more because once they got in the circle and their supplies were cut off, they were screwed. Tens of thousands of Germans, Russians, and civilians died from the cold. That's how bad it can get. We have one day of 0 degree temperature, and the whole damn thing has collapsed. That's unacceptable. Like I said, I've been here since '83. I've seen some really brutal summers. I've seen some really cold winters. Their feet held to the fire, and they are the ones that need to pay for this. I would imagine that the insurance claims are going to be, well, let's just throw out a number for the hell of it. $1 billion? When it's all said and done, when we find out how many homes, when they start thawing out, all the pipes burst on the municipalities because they couldn't run their pumps and their pipes burst, and then you got the street repairs that go with it. This is going to be horrendous. And who winds up paying for it? Well, if your insurance company pays for it, then we, the consumer, pay for it in higher rates. Will the bureaucrats at ERCOT and Austin be held accountable? Nah, that's got to stop. Across the political spectrum, it's got to stop. I still can't believe when I look through that list that they're in a working stiff one that works, that is on this board. Oh, that's right. They're not educated enough. Yeah, America work. And it ain't the politicians, it ain't the bureaucrats. It's the people with a hammer, a pick, a saw, a pickup, and a back. It ain't the politicians. It ain't the bureaucrats. It ain't the lawyers. It ain't these people with more degrees, but more times than not, all they do is get in the way. And I just wanted to rant about that a little bit, that this got to stop. This has got to stop. Yeah, I want to see an inquisition. I want to see all these people lined up in front of a table, and I want the hard questions asked, and no one can deflect, and no one can plead the fifth, and no one can say, I didn't know, because every one of them's involved, and you're all going to be held responsible, and they're not going to like it. Well, you know, that's just too damn bad, and that's what this country needs more of. You make a mistake, you admit it. You make a mistake that injures people, that costs lives, that costs money, you pay for it, because most of these people have more money than I got.